Hey, so I've been given a project to do for my pyrography. I'm a beginner, so I'm not actually looking to do a lot of really difficult things. So I thought I'd just film myself and see how things go. So first off, have a look around what we've got. This is quite an expensive beech worktop, so I'm protecting that with a sheet of rock board. House grade rock board, so when it burns it doesn't give off anything nasty. It's a bit of spare rock board from doing over the kitchen, so that's all fine. We've got my pliers for handling hot pyrography bits, because you don't want to touch them with your fingers at all. We've got my pyrography tool, which I've just turned on and is heating up. Little glass dish. Strange thing to have, but very important if you're using a solid point pyrography machine. I learnt this very quickly when I took a hot bit off my pyrography machine and put it on a table. You can imagine what happened from there. So a little glass dish just to hold the hot pieces. Now I've got a laser printer, so I've laser printed out the design. You may notice it's back to front. This is because it's a laser printer, so I'm just going to etch the design straight onto the piece of wood. It's quite quick, quite simple, quite easy. The piece of wood I'm using is a leftover from making the Beech tabletop, or the Beech workbench top. So it's finished on one face and it's exceedingly thick. We're going to par off the back later. The reason I've left it thick before doing the pyrography is if I make a mistake I can just plane it off. And I'm not a very good pyrographer yet, so that's what we're going to do. If I make a mistake, I'll just take a plane it off, back down to a smooth surface, resand it, refinish it, and start again. It's not been oiled, it's not had any coatings put on it or anything, so it's basically just a plain piece of beech wood. Still needs a little longer to heat up. I've got a little mount over here for my pyrography tool to hold it up off the desk. I've just taped it straight onto the piece of rock board so that it doesn't move. Aside from that, I've got a pair of scissors, some masking tape, and a seat and a camera. I've lined this up in the centre so that between either edge of the design and the edge of the wood there's 4 fingers, both top and bottom, and between the bottom of the wood and the start of the design, the top of the wood and the start of the design, there's 2 fingers. And I bent it when I first lined it up and got it lined up properly so that it stayed reasonably in place. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to whack a few little bits of masking tape down to hold the design in place. The one problem with putting designs on like this is you can't actually see whether or not your design's been put on successfully until you're done, if any bits of the design are missing. So one reason for taping it down like this and having the 2 folds in the piece of paper which the design is on is I can undo one side, lift it up, and if the design's not finished I can put it back down and line it up with a good degree of accuracy. Yeah, that's nice and warm. So when you're using a laser printer, you can't really do this with inkjet printing because it's not the same sort of ink. When you're using laser printing and you print your design back to front, you just lay it face down on the piece of wood, and then you use a design transfer bit if you're using a solid piece or a solid tip pyrography machine, and you literally just heat up the design. Doing your best not to set fire to the piece of paper when you do it, because that would be a bad idea. And your best to transfer the ink straight onto the piece of wood. And all this does is it uses the heat sensitive laser ink to its advantage by heating it up and literally by transferring it directly onto the piece of wood, in the same way the laser printer heats up the ink and transfers it onto a piece of paper. or so I've been led to believe. I may be talking complete and utter rubbish. If I am, feel free to correct me in the comments. You've all seen my pyrography tool on the unboxing, and if you haven't, feel free to pop over and see the unboxing. It's not particularly exciting. It's a very cheap pyrography tool because I'm just a beginner and I don't really know where I'm going. I'm basically picking it up as a bit of a hobby. I'm slightly afraid I may have scorched the wood a little bit over here where it got a little bit too hot before doing this. You don't actually have to brown the piece of paper. I've done this successfully, transferred patterns successfully without browning the piece of paper. But obviously the bit got a little hot. And I'm sure, considering we're going to be burning the wood later, a little bit of heat's not going to do too much damage. Or I should hope not. Hopefully the pattern's transferred nice and cleanly though. Problem I found with transferring patterns like this is you'll often have little bits of the pattern missing, like the corners and the edges, because you haven't spent as much time going over them as you have the rest of the pattern, which is why I'm spending a little bit of time focusing on, for instance, the bottom edge here, just to make sure that it transfers onto the pattern. That's half our pattern transferred, I hope. And now we're going to move on to the second half of the pattern, which is the second design and the second set of words at the bottom. Because this is a pattern for a friend, I don't have to worry too much about it. They know I'm a beginner, so I'm sure they'll be happy with what they get. If I was doing this on a commercial basis, I'd be of course a lot more worried about getting things wrong, but I'm not going to stress myself too much. It'd be like asking a martial arts student to be worried about whether or not their kata was perfect when they just walked in through the door for their first lesson. Aside from having a glass dish ready to take the hot bits from the pyrography machine, I did learn something else quite quickly. When I first had my first go at pyrography, which is when doing pyrography and you're actually burning into the wood, breathe out, not in. Might sound like a stupid thing, but when we're concentrating, a lot of people have a tendency to breathe in and hold their breath. Well, holding your breath's fine, but the breathing in that comes just before you hold your breath is actually quite unpleasant when you're doing this. So, before we take the pattern transfer bit off, we'll make sure the cable's not going to get touched by the pyrography machine, and we'll have a little look at how our pattern transferred. Not bad at all. Not bad at all. We've got a couple of bits of the pattern missing. I'll see if I can't transfer those on now. So, that's better. We've got the apple there. We've got to do the top of the O and the top of the R as well, and then our pattern will be complete. Just going to get rid of a little bit of the excess heat over there. So we've got the top of the O to do. The problem was it was so hot that it scorched the paper and I moved a little bit too quickly. Top of the O and the top of the R. Because it scorched the paper, I was a bit worried about the paper catching fire, so I moved too quickly and I didn't give it time to heat the ink up properly. There we go. One heavily scorched pattern and one block of wood with a nice neat pattern on it.